Welcome to From Caving In to Crushing It, the podcast for those who find themselves immersed in adversity and choose to write their story instead of having others write it for them. I'm Deraney, and I'm your host. Erik, so great to see you.
Great to be here, Drew. I'm really excited to be on your show.
I'm excited to have you. Thank you. And one of my favorite parts is before I hit record, getting to catch up with my guests. And we hadn't spoken in a while, and I just learned more of what you've been up to. So this is going to be a fascinating discussion. And I always like to thank the individual or for introducing me to my guest or acknowledge how we met. Now with you, it's been unique. LinkedIn, we met on LinkedIn. You reached out to me and we struck up a conversation and got to meet each other on Zoom. And you've got a fascinating story. And so it just goes to show you that when you reach out to people authentically on something like LinkedIn, there's something that resonates, and there's a reason why you reached out to me, and there's a reason why I answered you, because we don't respond to everybody who reaches out to us. So this is going to be fascinating. So thank you, LinkedIn, for having that platform that enabled Erik and me to get to meet.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're a superstar. It was easy to want to reach out and touch base, and I'm glad we did. And I'm glad we're having this conversation now because of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we'll get into it. We talk, in life, and we probably do it as new parents too. When we're young, we're told life is linear. Our parents tell us if you do A plus B plus C plus D, E is going to happen, and we believe it. It's not malicious. It's them protecting us, or they hope it's going to happen, or it works for them, or whatever. And life is linear until it's not. And something happens in life, an external circumstance that kind of gets in the way. And then the fun starts, and we have to make a decision. I firmly believe there's three types of men. I believe there's man number one, who has so many blind spots, Erik. He doesn't see anything. He just listens to that belief system of the world and of himself that was taught to him, and he just goes about his way throughout life, and nothing changes. And that's unfortunate. Right. Then there's man number two, a little more a heightened self-awareness, and he notices there's adversity, yet he's sure that he's the victim and others are to blame for what's happening to him. He doesn't make any changes because he doesn't believe he has any control over it. And he goes about his life the way it is, and there's nothing changes. And then there's man number three. And those are the men I have on this show. You are man number three, where adversity occurs, you have a more heightened self-awareness, your mindset is shifting from a fixed to more of a growth, and you notice something, and you say, that's not a barrier, that's an opportunity, where, Erik, there's another way, a better way to live, and I'm going to find it. And now that man number three, I always say there's like a subset of man number three. Man number three is ready to do something and has no clue what to do and how to start it, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's subset number two, where he has an idea how to do it. He reaches out to people, but he doesn't have the audience or the people in his community who are the experts and have gone through what they did. So he asks the wrong people, and he gets the wrong advice, and he gets taken advantage of and whatnot. And then there's man number three, subset number three, who has the right people in his community and knows who to go to and who have executed, and he reaches out to them and there's some success. Mm-hmm. So, I believe you're man number three and subset number three. So I'd like you to reach back as far as you need to. Mm-hmm. And capture that defining moment, that was either the tap on the shoulder, the whisper in the ear, or like I needed 6 years ago, the 2x4 upside the head, where you said to yourself, geez, Erik, there's a better way to live. This is an opportunity. I'm changing things.
Right.
Indulge us, my friend.
So many, because it's like a stepping ladder where there are adversity after adversity. Yeah. Dialectic materialism, you've got, goes up through the conflicts. Right. And I've had a lot. I'm going to start way back. Okay. And it's going to in high school, I was a poor student growing up, C minus student. And in my junior year of high school, I decided I want to become a college professor. And I
Hmm.
decided college professors don't get C minuses. And I immediately went from a C average to an A average. And then now I've been crushing it for quite a while, my last 2 years of high school.
Right.
And my brother and sister were both good students. And when they came home from their half hour, the school counselor meeting
Mhm.
about what you're going to do after school, they both had armfuls of brochures of colleges and things. My brother ended up going to Stanford undergrad, Harvard for
Mhm.
grad. My sister did really well. And so I'm excited for my meeting, right? They're three and
Right.
a half and 4 years older than me. And so I have my meeting, and the counselor's looking down at my transcript, and she sees C minuses and then A's. And she said, Erik, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I want to go to UCLA. And it was my only
Okay.
option. And she focused on the C minuses, and she looked down, pushed herself
Hmm.
away from the desk and said, Erik, you'll never get into a school like that. Walked out. And that was my whole meeting. I was sitting there for a half hour wondering if she's going to come back, trying to fight back the tears. And then I applied to UCLA, and I didn't get in. They rejected me. And that was the moment. That was the kick in the stomach where I could have believed her at that moment. Oh my gosh, she's absolutely right. And I didn't have a backup plan. I applied to one school only, and that was UCLA, and they rejected me. So I get through the summer, did some things, and then now it's approaching fall. I called my friend Kirk Rao, and I said, "Hey Kirk, what are you doing this year?" And he said, "I'm going to Green River Community College." I said, "Okay." Hung up the phone and got out the big yellow pages, if anybody remembers those.
Yeah. Yeah.
Called the community college with a dial-up phone and they mailed me an application, which I filled out and mailed back to them.
Yep.
And I ended up excelling in community college,
Good for
and
you.
I realized that straight A's aren't going to get me to UCLA. So I
Right.
did some extraordinary things at that school. I went to Africa. I hitchhiked from London to
Wow.
Zaire, actually.
Wow.
And in the end, 2 years later, I applied to UCLA, and this time they were happy to accept me. So I went to
Yeah.
UCLA and graduated with highest honors.
Good
Um,
for you.
so that was the first
And you
moment.
called the counselor
I
after that
didn't.
and told her.
Yeah, I hope she found out at some point. But so that was
Oh
the
my
big
God.
moment where
Yeah.
it really could have gone either way. But there are
Could have.
many moments of
Yeah.
adversity in my life that,
Yeah.
like you said, I chose to
Yeah.
accept, not to be a victim. I chose
Hmm.
to pull up my pants and figure out my next step to
Absolutely.
excel.
You know what? I resonate with that, with a somebody who's a mentor who says something that cru- could crush our spirits. Um, Now, there's a potential for to have done some stuff, the self-fulfilling prophecy that enabled you to get rejected from UCLA. There are things you probably could have done to change things so you could have gotten into UCLA, or perhaps there was a reason why you
Mhm.
didn't get in the first time.
Right.
I recall I had a first grade teacher who I admired who told my mother that I was a follower, not a leader, and didn't talk to me about how to become a leader. She told my mom. My mom told me what she said, and that set me for that path of I turned into a follower.
Right.
I believed it. I didn't have enough at 7, 8 years old. I didn't know enough about myself to believe anything otherwise. So I commend you, regardless of your age, the fact that you persevered. So with that transforming moment, what did you do with it?
I fully went to work, and I had that goal, and I've envisioned myself. I didn't even know what visualization and meditation and all these things I
Mhm.
work on now were, but I
Right.
did have a goal that I was seeing in my head, and
Hmm.
I worked towards that. But you know what? Like I said, it wasn't all peaches and roses once I got into UCLA. So
Right.
I get into UCLA, and I'm loving it. By the way, day one, I
Yeah.
loved it. But I got accepted to this honors anthropology program, undergraduate anthropology program,
Okay.
and now this is near the end of my junior year, and I'm
Mm.
sitting in this conference room with 8 other honors students and the professor and me, and I'm looking around the room, and actually it's a little earlier than that. It was my junior year though,
Yeah.
and I think every single one of them is better and smarter than me, and I
Oh
didn't
boy.
believe that I belonged in that room. I
Okay.
didn't know it at the time. It was imposter syndrome, and thank God my professor Peter Hammond's his name.
Good.
He recognized that, had lunch with me, took me under his wing a little bit.
Beautiful.
And by the next year, I won best undergraduate research at UCLA, cash prize. And
Wow.
so that would never have happened without, you said, surround yourself and listen to advice from the right people. So
Hmm.
he initiated the first conversation about me being in that room and belonging there.
Right.
But then I'm the one who had to continually believe that and work towards it. And in the
Right.
end, it worked out really well. But it would have
It's
been a
great.
struggle if I wouldn't have made that, again, choice
Uh-huh. Right. Absolutely.
to believe in
Absolutely.
myself versus
Right.
being the victim. And how did I get in this room that I don't belong in? It would have been a
Right.
whole different story. And so that really started. And Peter Hammond, he helped me through graduate school, through other things.
Wow.
He stayed. We remained friends until he died
Oh,
many years after I graduated.
oh boy. That's a phenomenal story. And the mentorship is so important. And many boys right now in our country don't have that mentor, and you're teaching us a very good lesson. I'm looking forward to the audience listening to you, that mentorship is important. And even though you had that initial mentor that wasn't right for you, you had that you were able to discern between the mentor who's right for you and not. And
Yeah.
Peter Hammond was there for you, and thank goodness he saw something in you and didn't and acted on it. The whole embodiment piece, right? Knowledge is, you can only go so far with knowledge and a desire. You have to act on it, and he did, and you did. I'd like to reach back a little bit to your community college,
Yeah.
where you mentioned you did some amazing things, and I don't want to just gloss over that you went to Nigeria and all that stuff you did, because that's going to connect to a story that I'm going to want you to tell us, that you told me before we hit record. So please tell me a little bit, or tell the audience a little bit of those amazing things you did in Nigeria that really, most likely really helped you go from even a fixed mindset even to more of a growth mindset that expanded your world.
Right. So I decided, first thing I did is I showed up for class. I was a front row seater. I went to office hours and just really worked hard to get the grades to
Mhm.
do that. So that was step one. But then I realized, like I said, I didn't think I'd get into UCLA even with straight A's.
Right.
So I decided I had to do something radically different.
Mm.
And I always liked animals like zebras and giraffes and elephants. So I thought I want to go, and it started by, I read a book in high school. We talked about Africa in my geography class, and then I
Okay.
read a book by Chinua Achebe called Things Fall Apart.
Mm.
And my eyes were wide open. I'm like, oh my gosh, this book tells a different story than I learned in my geography class about what
Interesting.
Africa is like.
Okay.
So I wanted to see it for myself, and I thought it would be a big, huge, it would separate me from other students who have A's
Absolutely.
who hadn't been to Africa. I
Right.
couldn't afford to get there. First thing
Oh.
my parents did is said no.
Okay.
So I did two things for 8 months. I mowed lawns to make
Uh-huh.
money, and I tried
Right.
to convince my parents why it was an okay idea. And I still couldn't afford to get to Africa. So I had to fly to London. It's the only place I could afford to get to on that side of the world. And I hitchhiked. The first night in London, I stayed at a runaway shelter, and I
Wow.
hitchhiked all the way down through Europe to Gibraltar in Spain, took a boat
Wow.
across to Morocco, kept hitchhiking and walking. And sometimes I'd take trains, and actually only in Morocco. But I worked my way all the way down into what was then Zaire, now the Congo. And the best part about it is I walked huge stretches, and it'd become dusk, and I'd be walking and I'd be entering a village, and I'd be scared every single time. I'm
Like,
entering an unknown village. They don't know
mhm.
me. I'm really, really remote. And I just went humbly and I asked if could I put my tent in the village, and in every single time they'd either put me in a hut, they'd let me put my tent in the village, they'd offer
Oh,
me food for, I mean, people who had like
oh,
two chickens, that's all they own. They own a little mud hut,
oh
two
my goodness.
chickens,
Right.
and they would slaughter one chicken to feed me for that night. And it was just amazing. But that me being nervous every time and
Hmm.
having to be vulnerable,
Right.
that, Drew, is the part that really, I think, made me learn a lot, that being vulnerable is a power when used correctly, because they wouldn't have helped me
So-
if I came in and said, hey, my name's Erik, I need a place to stay and some food. No, they would have literally beat me out of the village.
Right.
Well, I
Yes.
did,
Yes.
and none of the thing was great, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I mean, I
Yeah.
had rocks thrown at me, I had knives pulled out on me twice, I was
Yeah.
punched, so I mean, I had a few things happen, but
Yeah.
in the big picture, the people were so wonderful, and it
Right.
was that constantly being out of my comfort zone day
Yeah.
after day, having to, survive. I was only spending $50 a month, going
Okay.
doing this.
Wow.
So, but like I said, not everything was perfect. In Nigeria,
Hmm.
you can't go from Benin into Nigeria without I couldn't walk across the border.
Okay.
So I got a shared taxi, and getting through the border was a little bit of a nightmare. Then there were these checkpoints, and at every
Mhm.
checkpoint, they'd get me out, search my bag, want a little bribe sometimes, but it would take, a half hour to an hour every time. And then finally, after about the third or fourth time, the cab driver decided he's not going to stop at a checkpoint. In fact, he's going to try and speed through it, and that didn't go so well. One guy ran out and threw a spike board in front of the car. We slide
Wow.
to a stop. Another guy's shooting his gun in the air behind us. And then he came up to the car, puts the gun in my head, pulls me out. Excuse me. And so he
Oh
took
my
me into a
gosh.
hut, and he's pointing the gun at my face, and he said, "What are you doing here?" And I'd been speaking French in Morocco and North Africa for a month and a half, and
Okay.
so it just and he's speaking now in English, pidgin
Oh,
English, the common language in Nigeria.
right.
And I'm in such shock. I answered, "Je suis un tourist." I'm a tourist, I said in French. So that made him go into a rage. He said, "I'm speaking English to you. Why are you speaking French? You're a spy." And he stuck the machine gun literally into my mouth. It was still warm. It was the same gun that had been fired minutes earlier.
Oh,
Sticks the gun into my mouth, and I'm paralyzed with fear. And I'm looking around to see if there's blood and on the floor, and to see if this has happened before. And finally, he integrate. They unpacked my pack. My pack's now laying all over the bottom of the hut. It's about an hour later, and then finally he says, "You're not a spy. I know you're not a spy. In fact, I like Americans because they give me gifts." And then he wanted me to give him a bribe, and it was either my hunting knife or my
wow.
tent.
Uh-huh.
And I ended up giving him my tent. But and then got back in the cabin, made it back to Lagos. But that moment
Wow.
was a really defining moment of fear.
Hmm.
And then when I got back to the community college, 6 weeks later now, I'm back at Green River Community College. I took a quarter off. And then I doubled up on my time so I wouldn't lose time. But I took a quarter off
Okay.
to go to Africa by myself.
Hmm.
Then I saw this application for a job in Japan, and I really, now the travel bug had hit me
Yeah, of
since I had
course.
traveled that
Well,
much.
yeah. I mean, if you're able to go through Nigeria and
Right.
a near-death experience,
Yeah.
you're game for anything. Okay.
For sure. And I desperately want this job, and I applied, got an interview. And then the morning of the interview, all of a sudden I'm driving to the campus for the interview. I
Yeah.
wore a suit for the first time for an interview in my life.
Wow.
And as I got out of the car, my hand is shaking so much, I'm having a hard time getting the key into
Oh,
lock because I'm so nervous.
yeah.
And then I'm walking towards the building, and my hands are just pouring with sweat. And
Wow.
and I had studied a few Japanese words because I know the job in Japan. And I wanted to impress them, and I
Right.
tried to think of the Japanese words, and I couldn't think of them. And then I couldn't tell you my name. I was
Oh my
so paralyzed with
God.
fear because I wanted this job so much. And I'm now in the hallway, maybe 30 or 40 feet from the door I have to go in for an interview. And then all of a sudden, this voice in my head said, "You know what, Erik? 6 weeks ago, you had a machine gun in your face.
Yeah.
You really want
Yeah.
this job, but in the big picture, it's not that big of a deal." And I
Good.
took a deep breath. I wiped my hands
Good.
off, and I felt wonderful, Drew. I felt so relaxed and in tune with myself.
Beautiful.
I went in, shook hands, got the job. And it wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have put that fear in perspective. And so then afterwards, even in business, when I had a big negotiation coming up,
Mm.
whenever I'd feel that heartbeat start to go, my blood pressure start to rise, I'd take a breath, I'd smile, and then say, "You know what? This is your good place. This is where you want to be."
Yeah.
And I would translate that fear into excitement. And I think
Mm.
that led to multiple successes in my life once I harnessed that fear.
That's huge. And the lesson there is you do things scared.
Yep.
You may fail and not see it as failure. Turn that into success because you try again, right? If you win and you learn, right?
Yep.
And then what you tell me what you did during that time when you stopped before that door and whatever that was, that good voice
Mm.
there that had you anchor that feeling and thought into your brain. Did you do something? Because I've learned, because I ate fire once,
Okay, cool.
stick, and then I was told to anchor the feeling I had there so I wouldn't be scared. And I do something now, like underneath the table. I'll do my fist so hard that the fingernails go into the palm of my hand
Hmm.
to anchor that feeling. And so if I get it, when I get scared to do something now, I'll do that under the table and it'll get me to do it. Did you subconsciously or consciously or anything, how did you anchor that feeling to take that forward in life? Because that's a lifelong lesson that everybody can do if they know, if they're aware of it.
Yeah. So at that time, it just kind of happened naturally that I was
Okay.
able to but taking the
Good.
breath, I think was key.
That is
Just
big.
taking that deep breath, and I took a few deep breaths, and that was key in that moment. And I didn't know what an anchor was. Now I have an intentional one from NLP, neuro linguistic
Right.
programming,
Right.
where
Right.
it's the ring of fire, where
Okay.
I have this imaginary ring on my finger, and if
Mhm.
I'm going to speak on stage, for example, I take the ring off and I expand it to fit my body. I throw it on the floor, and I've already anchored a
Okay.
moment that was hilarious in my mind, and I anchored that moment. I
Okay.
anchored a moment when I felt confident. I anchored a moment that I felt proud.
Got it.
And so all
Hmm.
of these things are in that ring, and I visualize just this energy
Hmm.
and lights shooting through the ring, and then I step into the
Mm.
ring. As soon as I do, because of the anchor, I
Yep.
feel that confidence, that power, that joy,
Beautiful.
and even humor. And then I walk onto stage with that,
That's
rather
beautiful.
than being, nervous.
I love it. And then the lesson there, Eric, is that natural power is within each one of us.
Yeah,
And it's a matter of finding the people and allowing that experience to grow your mind so you can feel that confidence, because the natural power is within us and it's all
for
about
sure.
self-discovery. And all the stories you have told us along the way is all about self-discovery, and each step of the way you're learning about Erik Seversen.
Hmm.
And I absolutely love this, because the thing you said about the breathing, there is science behind it, because that deep breath, we talk about our ego. Our ego is there to protect us, right? So like the emotional ego is like, no, this is dangerous, Eric, don't do it, don't do it. Your deep breath put you into a rational ego state and enabled you, like you don't have that flooding in your brain of all the synapses going crazy, and you were able to put yourself in that rational state. And then the voice came and said, dude, you just had a hot rifle, the head of a rifle in your friggin' mouth 6 weeks ago.
Hmm.
So thank you for sharing that story. There's so much in there. Tell us a little about the job in Japan and that experience.
That was wonderful. So basically, my community college, Green River, was
Yeah.
starting a branch campus in Japan. So
Uh-huh.
it was a community college in Japan in English with mostly Western
Oh,
professors.
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Okay.
and I was sent over to startups. My title was student program specialist,
Hmm.
but I was three tasks. One was to start student government.
Hmm.
Two was to start student sports. And three, I was a liaison between the students who spoke English, even though they were
Hmm.
Japanese,
Yeah.
and the professors who were from Western countries. And I had
Hmm.
multiple months, I had 3 months of cultural training before I went over.
Okay.
And so I was kind of like that gap, because I was the student age, I was the same age as all the students, but
Right.
at the same time, I had, a job within the university, and I
Got it.
communicated with the professors,
Right.
and it wonderful. And that actually was my first big public speech.
Mm.
I was asked to speak during the ceremony, the opening of the school ceremony. So it was all of the school administrators and anybody linked to it. It was all of the students and their parents. And there were probably at that point 150 or 200 students, and then all their parents.
Mm.
And it was all of the officials in the town. It was called Kanuma, it was the town I
Oh,
was in.
wow. Okay.
And so I was asked to give a speech, and it went horribly in one respect. My note cards, I had note cards, and they got all mixed up. I had a translator. We were
Love
off
it.
a tiny bit, and then people were closing their eyes in the front row, and I'm thinking,
Oh boy.
people are asleep. My first speech
Oh,
ever, and half the room is asleep. room. It was outdoors actually.
Yeah.
But I found out later that that's a sign of respect, that they're actually closing their eyes to absorb the words and really pay attention to what you're saying. And I didn't know
Wow.
that. So I'm not going to say it was a flying success, but the applause were huge, which is
Ah,
very respectful.
that's wonderful.
But it was a good experience. And also the
Mm,
keynote speaker was this American guy who was fluent in Japanese, lived in
okay.
Japan,
Yeah.
and his speech was so great. And I remember he had these really radically funky glasses.
Yeah.
And I then, many years later, 2016 is when I decided to become a professional speaker.
Okay.
My first book was published, Ordinary to Extraordinary,
Okay.
in 2018, and I just started getting speaking requests.
Right, right,
And
right.
then I left a job as vice president of international business development to speak full time,
Okay.
and that was in January 2020. But when I started speaking, I thought I need to do something to set myself apart, and I remembered
Mm,
that speaker with his crazy
yeah, with the
glasses.
glasses.
And so now I decided it was red pants. So when I do public speaking, 100% of the time I wear bright red
Bright
pants.
red pants.
Yeah.
Why did you choose bright red pants of
I
all the
wanted
things you
to
could
do
have chose?
something that you couldn't mistake that there's something different about me, but it
Okay.
wasn't clownish, right? And I thought
Good.
I
Yeah.
thought bright red pants would work. And in the end, those bright
Yeah.
red pants have led to things. There was one thing used to go to China for 2 weeks a
Yeah.
year to do
Right.
workshops.
Yeah.
And one time there was a company that wanted somebody to build, design, and lead these online courses.
Yeah.
And they asked Communication University of China in Beijing if they knew of anybody.
Oh,
And evidently around the room, one of the administrators said, nobody remembered my name, Erik Seversen,
yeah.
but one of the administrators said, what about the guy with the red pants?
I love it. The guy with the red pants.
And they contacted me, and I ended up I still work with them. I still do classes for them to this day.
That's amazing.
All because of the red pants.
You know what? That's a very good another lesson that you're providing us is we are all unique in our own way. Other people don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you need to grab attention, there's no harm in doing something out of the ordinary
Mm-hmm.
because they're going to learn that you're extraordinary. Once they give you that,
Absolutely.
and you wrote that first book. It's fascinating stuff. So Erik, you said you're doing public speaking full time now. What are the topics you usually speak about ordinary to extraordinary? Do you have some other keynote
Yeah.
topics?
Yep. And I'm focusing a lot on book production and book consultation, and then I speak when I'm
Okay.
asked. But my main topics for speaking are overcoming fear. I did a TEDx
Yeah.
on overcoming fear, and I
Okay.
draw that from what I learned living for anthropology. I lived deep in the Amazon with
Right.
an indigenous tribe called the Wayana for
Okay.
6 months.
Wow.
And I spoke about how they handle fear, and
Right.
they're hunters and gatherers. Their biggest fear is not having food, how they
Mm,
handle fear as a community effort rather than an individual burden. And I say, even though we're not hunters and
mm,
gatherers, we have refrigerators and microwaves, what
right.
can we learn from them about
Right.
using community as a way to overcome fear? So overcoming fear is one. And also one of the ones that I give quite often because companies like it is how to create super fans who want to come back. And it's about building
That's good.
owners and managers building rapport with employees, frontline
Mm,
employees. That's one half of the talk. And the
love
other
it.
half is for frontline employees to build rapport with customers. And how do they create super fans that want to come back to their company over and over again? So that's another
Wow.
big thing. Yeah.
I love that topic. That reminds me of like where you want to create owners versus renters in terms of your employees. You want them to really feel like that's their
Exactly.
home versus, yeah, because there is a difference on how people work if they believe they own the place versus rent the place. So I love that topic.
Mhm.
Geez, there's so many questions I have for you. All right, you know what, folks? This can go on for like 4 hours. I know that you certainly have captured the essence of Erik Seversen, and you're going to want to get in touch with him, and you have to get in touch with him. Strongly suggesting it. Go to Erik's website, erikseversen.com. That's ErikSeversen.com, or on LinkedIn. Very, very active on LinkedIn. Obviously, we met through there. Definitely worth having a conversation with Erik. Anything else? I know you are working on, I know you showed one book. I know on LinkedIn, your banner has like a, not a million books, but you have a nice little series there. You're working on something now, which is why you got in touch with me. Tell us about the anthology you're working on.
Yeah, so the one I contacted you about, which is the Life Coaches Toolkit,
Mhm.
and it's ready to use strategies, principles, and activities. Um, this one's done, but
Okay.
I'm working on the Life Coaches Toolkit Volume 3 actually, and the reception has been really good because I'm not a trained life coach, but
Right.
people ask me to coach them, and
Right.
so it's a book I wish I had. And so I created it with 27 expert life coaches or people who understand things like you.
Yeah.
You work with people about having them find their best lives, particularly young
Absolutely.
men finding their best lives. So I reached out to people like you to create this wonderful book with different perspectives and things like that. The next book I'm working on, which I'm
Yeah.
still gathering authors for, actually,
Okay.
I
Okay.
am radically excited about. It's called The AI Mindset: How to Thrive in Civilization's Next Big Shift. And
Wow.
basically, AI is here to stay, whether you like it or not. I
Hmm.
think people are going to be on the AI bus and really do well, and people are going to be left behind who are
Yes.
either avoid it or afraid of it. And I want people to at least understand it so they can choose to be on that bus or not. You don't
Absolutely.
have to love AI to agree that it's going to be here to stay.
Absolutely. That book is going to be amazing because the sooner you embrace AI, you don't have to embrace every aspect of it.
Nope.
You just like in life, barrier versus opportunity, right? There's going to be a piece of it that's going to resonate with you, and you're going to learn from it. So I love that approach, and I'll definitely support you on that. All right. Before I ask you the two final questions I want to ask you, I don't want to gloss over why I had you tell that story about you being in the indigenous tribes in Nigeria, because before we hit record, you told me a story that happened recently with your 18-year-old son. And I'd love for you to tell that story really quickly before we get to the final two questions.
Yeah, so one of my biggest goals in life, and this is for my wife too, we're on the same page, is developing our. We have two boys. They're both one's just 19, one of them's 18,
Mhm.
and we want them to develop into strong. We don't want them to think of themselves as victims. We want them to be strong men who
Mhm.
have good core values, and try and be as good of people as they can and be great to
Love
others.
that.
Part of that is kind of like when my first son graduated from high school. We went to Kilimanjaro, went to Tanzania and climbed
Mhm.
Kilimanjaro together. My second son this year, he wanted to go to the Amazon basin. And so
Mhm.
I got a contact with the Kofan tribe. I went way, way, way upriver with them. And so we didn't even bring food with us. We brought
Okay.
a bunch of bananas and a bunch of plantains. And then we had to hunt and gather all of our food with these seven
Unbelievable.
Indians deep
Love
into the
it.
forest. And to be able to see my son survive and enjoy being in a
Right.
very difficult environment.
Yeah.
Rained a lot. There was we're the jungles. There's lots of sticky plants. There's things to
Yeah.
avoid. We're hunting
Yeah.
piranhas. We're fishing piranhas.
I
But
love
to
it.
see my son really, really engage in a
Mhm.
totally different environment with a totally different culture was amazing. And the biggest part wasn't about where we were. It was about that relationship with my son as he's going to go
Absolutely.
off to college and be on his own next year. I want
Absolutely.
and I shared with him, Drew, it wasn't all, rainbows and unicorns.
Right.
I told him about mistakes I made in my
Yeah.
life
Yeah.
that he didn't know about because I
Yep.
want him to learn from my mistakes and he can make his own choices and hopefully avoid some of the things I did wrong.
I
And
love
so it was a
this.
really great time of helping him develop into a strong man.
Well, I mean, you're definitely a strong man. You did a lot. You created memories. You guys have a connection and a bond that won't be severed. And the respect I'm sure he has for you and your mistakes you made, he's listening to that, and
Mhm.
he's not going to be afraid of making his own mistakes because he's learned from it. And what 18-year-old can say he's done what he's done with his father?
Right.
That I'm telling you, man, that is beautiful, beautiful story. Oh, geez. All right. So, final two questions. Are you ready?
Yes.
All right. So, I'm going to give you the opportunity to use your imagination. You're sitting with Erik, 7 to 10-year-old Erik, right now,
Uh-huh.
and you want to give him some advice about life. What are you going to tell him?
I'm going to tell him, one, I'm going to say things are going to work out. And I was a pretty anxious kid. I think like you, based on your earlier book,
Mhm.
I'll Have What She's Having. I was a kind of a little bit over the top people pleaser.
Mhm.
And it's exhausting sitting in class, trying to please your teacher by saying the right thing, or please your friends by, acting the right way. And so I would say it's really good to make people happy,
Mhm.
but don't get stressed over pleasing them too much. I mean,
Right.
a little bit of stress to make people happy is a good thing,
Mhm.
but I spent so much. I had anxiety of
Yeah.
trying to make sure everybody was happy,
Oh, yeah.
and so I was too much. And I found that balance. I
Good.
still want to be good to people. I still
Mhm.
want to be kind to people,
Right.
but I found a better balance that's also more healthy to me. So that's the first thing. That's what I'd say.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Love that. Wish I had that advice when I was younger, but we can't regret, so I use it now.
Good.
All right. So switch hats. Now you're sitting down with young Erik, the young businessman, young entrepreneur, and you want to give him advice about business. What are you going to tell him?
So that one is because I went in, I was teaching for a while. I was at
Yeah.
UCLA teaching ESL, loving everything, but I couldn't support my family in LA on my teaching salary. And
Right.
so I went into business begrudgingly, thinking that I wasn't going to like it because I didn't think it was my personality.
Right.
And I loved it.
That's
And
wonderful.
so I would tell my earlier Erik, business can be very fun as long as you do things you enjoy, and
Yeah.
I went into an area of business that I did enjoy, and I thought of it as a game. Even when I was managing people,
Mm,
I made games out of how I could manage them
love
better.
that.
And
Right.
so that would be it, is engage it, and you're going
Mm,
to really, really enjoy it. And so I think it came at the right time though. So I went into business in 2020,
mm.
2007,
Okay.
and loved it for 12 years. And now I'm
Yeah.
100% self-employed, still
Beautiful.
still in business, but not in the
Yeah.
corporate setting.
Right. Right. Love it. Great advice. I pray that people take your advice, people who are listening. Erik, I want to thank you for coming on, for coming into my life, for reaching out on LinkedIn, for just for being the human being you are, because you could have easily had all those experiences and kept it to yourself. You shared your story, and you're sharing your story, and you're giving people that confidence to share their own story, because people need to hear people's stories. And what I found is you and I need to hear our own story,
Mhm.
because by telling my story out loud, I healed myself from within.
Great.
There's a power in sharing your story. So I guess that's how I'll end this. So
I
again,
love
thank
it.
you, Erik.
Thank you, Drew. I really loved speaking with you, and I look forward to being in touch for a very long time.
And as do I, my friend. Hey, everybody out there, please take care of yourselves. Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe and give us a review to help others find it. I'd like you to answer this question. Are you living the life you want to live, or are you living the life others want you to live? I'd like you to think about that for a second, because I strongly suggest you live the life you want to live. If you want to learn more about what I stand for and my services and how I'm able to help many men get out of their own way, please go to my website at www.profitcompassion.com. Feel free to also email me at drew@profitcompassion.com. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Take care of yourself and choose to write your own story instead of letting others write it for you.